Greetings and welcome to Association Rockstars, where we hear about the journey and insights of amazing association executives and partners who are building the association industry of tomorrow. I'm your host, Lowell Aplebaum, the CEO of Vista, Cova, where we provide facilitation partnership to organizations on strategy, visioning, and governance. And with me today is Adam Levy, CAE. Adam is the Executive Director of the American Cleft, Palate, Craniofacial Association. An experienced association executive and career nonprofit professional, Adam previously served as the Deputy and Interim Executive Director of the American College of Osteopathic Emergency Physicians and held roles at the National Restaurant Association and SmithBucklin, the world's largest association management company. He serves on the board of directors of the Association's Executives of North Carolina and the Small Staff Associations Advisory Committee of ASAE. Adam was a recipient of the Association Forum's 40 Under 40 Award in 2022 and holds his CAE, which we always love, from the American Society of Association Executives. Adam is passionate about healthcare access and equity, in addition to mentorship and leadership, and is a mentor for the ASAE Young Professionals Committee. He holds a bachelor's degree in English education from Indiana University, completed the Strategic Leadership Program at Northwestern University, a native Chicagoan and Michael Jordan devotee. Adam lives in Chapel Hill with his wife, Rachel, twin daughters, and their loving pit bull rescue dog, Mason. Adam, so happy to have you with us today.
Great to be here, Lowell. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I appreciate it.
Well, we always like to start these conversations in a similar fashion. You know, those that we speak to, we're talking to you because that you are a leader of the industry and you have strengths that have helped you succeed in your career. So as someone who has little ones of their own, we often talk about strengths in my household as superpowers. So what is one of your superpowers that you've either gained over the years or was naturally born to you?
Yeah, this one's fun. And I've obviously watched the podcast of sorts before and heard what others have said. So it was fun to think about ahead of time a little bit. And the one that I came up with, it's interesting. It actually comes from my grandfather. His name was Phil. He lived to be 101 until just a couple of years ago. Yeah, so talk about perseverance. He was a disciplined guy, but he was the most sort of giving and altruistic human that I knew. And the thing that he taught me and a lot of others in our family and his friends was really just the power of optimism. So, he lived through a lot in his 101 years, including some pretty rough times way back in the day. And the way that I sort of live because of everything I learned from him is the concept of sort of glass half full. He used his, power or his leverage, anything he had in his day to help others. So if that was owning a business, it'd be hiring minorities at a time when no one was hiring minorities. If it was family in trouble, it would be helping people with money because he had it and they didn't. So sort of learning all these lessons from him, he used to tell me all the time, it could be worse. So that's honestly sort of my superpower is sort of eternal optimism. I sort of look at everything that way. It could always be worse. And I think that really helps drive me, especially in this kind of mission-driven servant leadership role that I'm in and that we all do, and keeps me focused and grounded. And it makes it so when things aren't going well, I kind of always remember why we're really here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really loved that about him and taught me quite a bit.
Remind me, how long have you been at the current organization? When did you start?
3 years and a couple of weeks.
So that makes me want to ask, because I figured that was the case. So you started just at sort of perhaps not the height of the pandemic, but certainly early heading towards it. Talk to me about the juxtaposition about starting at a new organization at a time of global pandemic, with your strength of optimism and how those things interplayed into how you took on the role.
I think I recall meeting the board chair who hired me, who was the president at the time that I was hired. And she sort of made a funny comment to me, like, you really are like this in person, aren't you? And they had only met me via Zoom.
I think that's a compliment, but
it was a compliment. Exactly.
Okay.
It was a compliment. And she's lovely and great. I think that was my message coming in, was there's a lot to be optimistic about. And the work that we do here. And at the time it was, the language was, joining you and the work that you do. I could see it clearly from the outside kind of coming in. And I have littles at home, and we've benefited from the concept of team healthcare. Myself being, my kids were in the NICU when they were born. So, an array of occupational therapy, speech therapy, surgeons, nurses, a little bit of everyone, pediatricians. So it felt natural to me to be optimistic about this idea of, why this organization has existed for 80 years, and with a lot ahead of us. So it was really about getting the culture of the organization to be optimistic, to get the board re-engaged. I felt like we needed a new strategic plan. We hired a guy, I don't know if you know him, his name's Lowell. He came in, and we really set out a path here, and we've done a lot in the last few years. So I'm really excited about where we are.
I'm really interested in what you just framed as getting the team to embrace optimism. Culture is such a secret sauce of potential, but it's also one of those things that it's a lot harder to measure on the bottom of a budget sheet. So as you think about how you were able to sort of get your team on board with a philosophy of optimism, either at this position or at previous positions, right? Like, how do you take that and help others see it, embrace it, right? To leverage it for the benefit of the organization and perhaps themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is finding people who buy into the culture from the start. And then a lot of it is, in my case, I inherited, there were team members who were already there, and wanting to make sure that they were on board with that concept of optimism and growth, and, a great path ahead. I think that was really where I started from day one. I think that had to be very, very clear. The other item that was very clear was what I said to everyone. It's not my term, but it was decentralization. So it was the idea that in a small group, everyone had to not only buy in, but also own what they were really working on. It was a lot of responsibility to take on what we do in the smaller group in terms of the impact it has on our members, or the patients and families that we serve. I think really driving that impact home was really critical. And then really next to that, it was believing in people that work here at ACPA. So, our whole staff is just beyond fantastic. I'm honored to work with our whole crew every day. They shine. They are the epitome of, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, especially in specific areas. That's what really makes us tick. And so once we got there, combined with that concept of optimism, I think it was a pretty clear road ahead. So yeah, that's why we are where we are.
I'm interested. You were talking about sort of the small staff aspect of there, and your background, as we read, right? You've done work in the National Restaurant Association, not a small association.
Not a small,
right? Like SmithBucklin, not a small association management company, right? And now you're the ED of an organization that's considered a small. How many total staff?
We have seven.
So it's considered a small staff organization.
Yeah.
I would love just to hear, in terms of philosophy, approach, practicality, of the potential impact for small staff organizations to make a difference, and how you leverage resource to do so.
Yes, not National Restaurant Association. I think the biggest difference that I, conceptualized or understood a little ways back was the idea of more of a corporate culture versus smaller entrepreneurial culture. Not that you kind of can't have both, but I think in our space and associations, there's a pretty clear distinction. National Restaurant, I worked in the Ed Foundation specifically, which still was part of the large office in downtown Chicago. And, it reminded me more of my days at SmithBucklin, which is again an AMC, but you kind of function in the premise of a corporation serving within other associations. I would say I didn't buy into what the associations did nearly as much as I did to the work that I was doing at those associations. So like I had a blast planning trade shows earlier on at SmithBucklin, and kind of just getting to know these random industries of associations. And then at National Restaurant, again, kind of the idea of the events that I was planning and who I got to work with and things like that were very exciting. And I had a blast doing them. It wasn't until I really stepped into the smaller groups and one stop in between at a smaller nonprofit that I started to really buy in that concept of like, wow, we at this kind of small scale can impact the lives of so many people. And I think that's the epitome of groups like where I'm at now, where I was at last time at ACOEP. I mean, I say it to people all the time, we're 7 people, partners, contractors, obviously as well.
Right.
You go to a meeting. I mean, even a scale like the ASAE annual meeting, you're impacting thousands of people who show up. You don't have a staff of 200 people running around doing all this. You plan well, and you're ready for creating that impact, and then boom, there it is. So that to me is very special. We do a ton of work with not a lot. And if it weren't for groups like us, the hundreds of other small staff associations, you think about the industries, the professions, the careers, the continuing education credit, the advocacy, all of that goes into it would just not be in existence if it weren't for these small groups who are just cranking away with not a whole lot.
Do you think, for larger organizations, not that people are staying at organizations for 50 years as much anymore, but for larger organizations, the idea of seeing a career path, right, seeing pathways for advancement is a little bit easier to see a trajectory. For a small staff organization,
yes,
there's perhaps not as much trajectory within the organization because it's small staff.
yeah.
Just wondering your reflections in terms of places of like learning and leadership development for association professionals and small staff.
Yeah.
Any thoughts you have on like how they develop that and what it looks like to have a career there?
So that's a fantastic question. I have a couple thoughts on that. First, I would say taking that hat from the larger organizations and bringing it over was really critical for me. So on the entrepreneurial side of things, I was always going off or out going on and on about this idea of like, well, hey, just because we're not Google doesn't mean we can't do, embody that same mindset of just doing and trying. So I think that same mindset went to, call it HR. So I reached out to former colleagues who I worked with in some of these larger places. We developed core competencies. We developed a career path. We developed what it meant to be at different levels. The org chart is clear. I think a lot of time and effort went into that early on in my tenure here, but it was to set the basis that people would want to stay. We did have some turnover right when I started and before I had started, and one of my initial goals in year one, like my specific executive director goals, was to reduce turnover. So that meant go to town on what was causing turnover. And I think career path is probably the number 1 or 2 thing in terms of why people leave. I think not having opportunity or toxic team members is number 2. So having those 2 things in mind, again, that goes back to the cultural element. But yes, making sure everyone understood I can stay here and have somewhere to go. That is my job and the board's job to make sure that we're creating a framework that allows people to do so. So again, that's me going to the board and saying, I don't care what you're telling me about budget. If we don't somehow come up with a way to change a little bit of what we do or sunset an old program to put more funds into personnel, these people are going to leave. So it's convincing leadership, and then my purview that it's far more expensive and detrimental to the organization to have people leave than it is to find funds somewhere to keep them there.
I love that philosophy. It's really unique and incredible to see the transition you've been able to make from a large organization mindset to a really effective and passionate small organization mindset and effective leadership. As you reflect on sort of your professional journey, are there any key moments of growth or achievement that you experienced that really, as you think about like the years of your work experience, that were pivotal, that stand out to you as important moments?
So many.
Give me 1 or 2. Give me 1 or 2.
I'll try to limit it. I would say, my background was traditionally meeting planning, and for whatever reason, well, it was either for whatever reason or because I embraced it. I'm not sure. Maybe it was the latter. Whenever I was exposed to leaders in other organizations or within my own, I took advantage of that. So that would mean at SmithBucklin, I recall, and I feel like I've probably told the story before, but Henry Givray was the CEO when I was there. And we had some big clients. The first member that comes to mind with him actually was the Association for Corporate Growth, which is now a pretty large organization.
Oh yeah.
They were at SmithBucklin when I was there as a managed company. So I sat next to Henry at a gal dinner and I just listened to him talk for like 2 hours, or with him talking for 2 hours. And I just tuned in, so I was like, hey, if I'm here, I'm going to sit. I don't know why he was sitting at the same table that I was, but it happened. So it was moments like that. National Restaurant, I ran some interesting events and fundraisers and advocacy related things with leaders in the food service industry. So these were like CEOs or C-level people from like the big brands, the Cisco, Coke, Pepsi, Dunkin', those groups. Dawn Sweeney, who was CEO of National Restaurant back then, interacting with her and her team because of these high level attendees on the event side of things and the logistical side of things. So what did I do? I sat and I listened. And I think, those are some pretty pivotal moments where I really wanted to tune into what people were saying, how they were behaving, how they were, going about their business, what they expected from others, what I didn't like maybe about how some people handled themselves or how they spoke to others, especially in positions of power. And then the only other example I would say is in my previous organization, COVID hit right before I had left to come here. And I was in a position of high responsibility in a group of emergency physicians.
Yeah.
And the concept of responsibility really hit me hard there because we were on calls with CDC and NIH and the Army and all these different groups like that. And again, it just felt like this moment of, if no one else is going to do it, then I suppose I should probably do it. This is a pretty pivotal item. So yeah, just embracing opportunity when it came and trying to do it the right way.
So you think about and reflect upon, as we've emerged from at least the onset of the early 2020s, and you think about the leadership that the association profession needs in the coming years. Are there any specific skill sets or strengths that you think the next generation of leaders and rock stars are going to really need to succeed, knowing that the times we're moving into are more turbulent than ever?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I do, serve as a mentor on YPAC through ASAE, and I've been happy to. I've tried to reciprocate the dozens of meetings or calls where I've reached out to somebody and said, hey, can I have 10 minutes? I have a few questions, other CEOs or EDs, and making sure that if somebody does the same for me, that I'm here the same way. So I feel like in listening to a lot of the concerns and what's going on, there's a sense of restlessness, I think, that I hear quite a bit. I think for younger, or as we like to say, newer in practice, newer professionals, to take the age out of things. For newer in the association world professionals, it's the idea that coming out of COVID has been difficult to really maybe fully embrace the association model and understand how special it is, whether you're remote or in person. I truly don't believe that makes a huge difference. I think it's more just the uncertainty of the world and trying to understand how servant leadership can be a really meaningful career. So, for me, it's anybody who's in this already, it sort of feels like it's our job to make sure people are aware of why this is a really special place. It also is a great industry to amplify and to ally with people who don't always have the same opportunities in other areas. I mean, we've seen it at ASAE last week, the number of different organizations that have sprung up to help amplify those voices and put people in positions of power, meaning get more women in the C-suite, get more, minorities in the C-suite, work for organizations with strong DEI policies. I mean, these are things that, again, as associations, you have the power to impact thousands of people with very small resources. So again, getting newer people in this industry to buy into that and to be a little less worried about, a little less restless, and instead see sort of what the future holds, I think is really my prerogative in terms of when I'm mentoring or talking to anybody about the opportunity in front of them.
I'll say, and there's so many insights on what you just said, but one thing that just resonated loud with me is servant leadership as career, right? Doesn't have to be a deficit. It actually is how we build, right? It's how we build a better world. And hopefully we can find success. I mean, I think many do find success.
Yeah. And look, real quick with that, I learned early on in the hard way, maybe this goes back to your other question. Back when I started, the word nonprofit, really alluded to this idea of like living in a 1-bedroom basement unit, in downtown Chicago, like my former life. You couldn't really make a career out of it. You couldn't make any money. You couldn't be happy, but you felt good about helping, people. And I learned pretty early on that didn't feel very good. I liked helping people, but I didn't like not enjoying my life and living my own life as well and taking care of myself. So again, I think we've come to a point where you can be in this position of servant leadership. You can do for others, but you can also make a career out of it, and you can enjoy it, and you can thrive within it.
Yeah. Well, it's clear that you are thriving, and your example in your leadership and your giving back is helping drive the community. We always close out with a similar question, which is far, far, far in the future. What is the legacy you hope to leave behind in our association community?
It's flown by. Oh, wow. I could talk to you all day. I know you'd get sick of me.
Not at all.
My legacy, I would say it's simply based on, it's easy because it's what I do every day. I want to see the people who, I work with, who work, at our organizations, reach the goals that they set out. And if that means that they move elsewhere, because that's what's next, I've helped them do that. If they want to stay, all the better. But again, it's making sure that they're happy and that they have the future, laid out in front of them. I think when I look around and I see anybody who's succeeding, who I've mentored or managed or anything like that, that's it for me. It was actually at an ASAE meeting one year. Somebody had a quote that was something like, in leadership, your job is to like learn the role, train your replacement, and then leave. I don't look at it that kind of tersely, but that's my job, is to run the association well, make an impact on the lives of patients and families, and make sure that our staff rockets into the future, whether it's here or elsewhere. So that's without a doubt what I hope to look back on and see.
Well, I look forward to seeing how far that rocket goes. It's been a pleasure to have you with me and with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
As always, thank you to Amy Hager, who's been on all the interwebs chatting with y'all and making the magic happen here. And thanks to all of you for tuning in and listening and learning together as we build a better association community. Until next time, Association Rock.